We'll see. All right. I think we are just about live now. So, everybody, welcome back to the Team Coaching Zone podcast. I'm Krister Lowe, and I'm joined with my colleague, Melissa Sayer. Our third host, Carissa Bubb, will not be making it today. She's in South Africa, and they've had power outages in the part of the country where she is. So, sadly, it'll just be Melissa and I, but we'll make it hopefully fun for you guys, and we will be having Carissa back in future episodes. So great to be back. It's been a little while here getting season 3 up and running, but we finally got our ducks in a row, and we're super excited to get back into these conversations, and lots of new things in store for this season. And just want to start off by, for those of you who are new to the show, the Team Coaching Zone has been going on since 2015. And so I started off in season 1 in 2015. My goal was to do 100 episodes, and I did that, and it was amazing. I think I interviewed you, Melissa, at one point on the show with your colleague
right.
Colum.
That's how we met.
Who we'll have back on the show in the future. And that was just an amazing journey for me. It totally transformed my life. I got trained in a half dozen team coaching approaches, and this space really for me was about learning. And I would learn and reflect, go out and try stuff with teams, and kind of throw the spaghetti on the wall and see what would stick. So it was an amazing journey. It again changed my life and led to all kinds of serendipitous opportunities in the field. Got involved in training team coaches, supervising team coaches, and the like. So it's been a wonderful journey. I then passed the podcast over to Carissa Bubb, who ran 30 to 40 episodes, and really evolving that. And Carissa, I'm based in the United States. Carissa is based in London. And then we've had a little bit of a hiatus here for season 3, but we thought, since team coaching is about teams, while one-on-one interviews are interesting and we're still going to continue to do those, we thought it would be more suitable to have, some team huddles, team conversations to explore what's going on in the field. So we're excited to share with you what our plans are for this season, and we'd love to get your inputs, as this season unfolds, and who the guests are you'd like to have on. We'd love to hear your recommendations. But I really want to spend a little bit of time helping you get to know Melissa, who's a dear colleague and now become a friend. And I think if it wasn't for the team coaching field, I wouldn't know Melissa, I don't think. And so she's based in Dublin, and she's going to be one of the stalwart drivers and hosts of this season. I've had a chance to get to do some work with Melissa, and she's been a great partner. She's been finishing a doctorate on team coaching, has a background as an MBA, but I don't want to steal any more thunder out of Melissa's journey, but she's a very established person in the field. But Melissa, great to have you on the show, and for us to be kicking off this season here.
Absolutely, Krister. Delighted to be here as a colleague and as a friend, and that we're framing this around learning conversations and really opening up and diving into, what are the conversations that we need to be having in the world of team coaching, in the world of work that we do with teams, so that we can really continue to make impact. You asked me to tell a little bit about me. That's always not my favorite topic, but I guess when I started off my career in the late 1990s in London in the construction industry, and I found myself at a very young age being responsible for a team of professional surveyors. And then I also found myself being part of the senior leadership team a number of years later. So I had my own team. I was a member of a senior leadership team of an organization that was responsible for a sizable portfolio of income for investor clients in the property world. And looking back on it now, didn't kind of even appreciate it at the time. I was also leading team of teams. So I had the professional surveyors that were kind of reporting to me, but the nature of the work that we did meant that we needed to bring in lots of different expertise from within our function, but also from the wider organization in order to service clients. So I guess that gave me a really good grounding in the whole world of client relationship management, a real appreciation of serving stakeholders. Um, but I just felt totally ill
Mm,
equipped, to be honest with you. And that's when I decided around kind of late 2000s to return to Ireland. That was kind of a personal decision. And it seemed like a great opportunity to go off and pursue education around all of these leadership gaps I felt
mm,
myself as somebody that was leading teams, responding to complex stakeholder needs, and so on and so forth. So that took me off on an MBA, and I was fully convinced that that was going to give me all of the answers for how to be a better leader and be better at leading teams. And boy, was I wrong.
mm,
But I had a really brilliant experience on that MBA, Christer,
mm,
because it was a team-based MBA.
mm,
So what that meant was, your grades, everything was dependent on being able to do really good teamwork. And guess what? There was no boss. So it was shared leadership, self-management teams, where this team of people around you had a real impact on how well you did or didn't do on this program. And I remember finding it the most frustrating experience ever. And
many
again,
team
that
experiences in graduate school.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because I came onto the MBA thinking to myself, well, I'm going to get all the answers as to how to lead teams better. And then I'm going to go back into the construction industry and take the industry
Mm,
by storm. And then I found myself getting really frustrated with this
mm,
whole idea of shared leadership. And being quite honest with you, recognizing at a kind of a gut level that there was something in it, but resisting it at a cognitive level, because
mm,
here I was getting my MBA. I wasn't, wanting to learn about sharing leadership. I was wanting to learn how to dominate. And that's just the honest truth of it. So I went
mm,
off and I set up a consultancy business. Never returned back to property because
mm,
the MBA opened me up to a whole new world. And as you know from working with me, there's still skills that are really valuable, and you see that showing up in how I work a lot. However, went into this consultancy business with my expert hat on, and realized very quickly um, that it wasn't going to work, and it wasn't fulfilling. And what wasn't fulfilling about it was that leadership teams were essential to driving any change in organizations, and the dysfunction that was happening at leadership team level meant that I wasn't going to be able to do good work. And I had this pivotal moment where there was this really big project that I was working on. And it wasn't in great economic times either. This was kind of post 2008, 2009, when we were going through some really difficult economic circumstances. But the project was failing, and I convened the leadership team into a room, and instead of telling them my expert opinion as to what I thought was wrong with the project, I took a different approach. And my approach was one of helping them see a lot of what their actions, behaviors, incongruence was doing.
mm,
And that was it. I went home. I said to my husband, that was exhilarating, but I was complete fraud. I can't wing it. I need to learn how to coach. And it set me off on this long journey of wanting to work with teams to unlock the challenges that they are facing, as
mm,
opposed to providing the solutions. Wanting to help individual leaders. So, as you know, I've taught on the MBA program that I was once a participant of for the past 12 years, all around the space of leader
mm.
development, team effectiveness.
At
Um,
Trinity, yeah.
at
Hmm.
Trinity, yeah. And really just wanting to unlock the power that really good collaborations,
Mm,
whether they be the more kind of traditional authority structures, whether they be shared leadership environments or
Mm,
whatever the type of team leadership is going on, really supporting those teams to not just solve their own problems, but more recently, I've become more occupied with the importance of healthy teams
mm,
creating healthy work environments. And one of the topics I hope we get to talk about on the podcast, Krister, is that I really feel that organizations are sick and unwell,
yeah.
and leaders need support as to how to do something about that.
Mm,
And I think that sickness that we're seeing in organizations is a parallel of what we're seeing in the world. You
yeah.
know, today is 1 year since, Russia invaded Ukraine. You and I were coaching a team this day last year
Mm,
where the team leader was directly impacted
right. I remember.
personally by that invasion.
Mm,
That's just one example of the sickness that's going on in our world. And I think that's paralleling into our organizations, paralleling into disassociation, because here we probably are a year later, Krister, and people are just kind of living with the fact that there's this big war going on in Europe.
mm.
And, you know,
Well, it has the risk of engulfing everyone because it seems like
yeah,
it's kind of escalating to that.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's something we'll have to talk about because I do think the
We'll have to talk about.
geopolitical context is bearing down on just human security, but let alone the economies. And I think there's a huge
Workplaces.
hangover
Yep.
after the
Yeah.
pandemic with the central bank, money printing and all that's going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's something I think that we already can start diving in. But before we do, Melissa,
Yeah.
just in your background, I know you've also been working on a doctorate on team
Oh,
coaching. And
yes.
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
it's very relevant to what we want to be doing here on Fridays, which is really
Yeah.
having learning conversations. Because I think your dissertation has to do with team coaching and organizational learning. And I'd love for you to give a little just snippet on that to the listeners.
Thanks
Yeah.
for the reminder. And as you know, I tend to start on one subject and then go off into all different domains. So thanks for the reminder on that. I guess, well, the first thing to say is to thank you and others that we work with for being so supportive over the last couple of months, because as you
Mm,
know, I'm trying to get it wrapped up and submitted next month. And the focus on the doctorate, it started off as a curiosity around this thing that we do called team coaching. Tends to be with senior leadership teams, management teams, and what might we need to consider to enable that intervention to have a wider impact in the organization. So that's kind of what brought me into it, not knowing that organizational learning and team learning was where I was going to end up. But fundamentally, when I start trying to answer that question around, can the work that we do with those few teams that we get to work with in an organization have a bigger impact on the rest?
mm,
So the focus has been on looking at aspects of team coaching processes that most contribute to team learning, or could most contribute to team learning,
mm,
that could most contribute to organizational learning outcomes. And one of the things that I've been really examining and looking and probing into further is we spend a lot of our time raising this question of how can we help teams and leaders learn. And one of the things that I came across in my research, which I hope that we'll
mm,
dive into really fully on another episode, is how can we help teams unlearn?
mm.
Because sometimes it's not always about what it, that whole idea of progress and action and learning and all of the
Mm,
things that we associate with team coaching. But sometimes there are things going on either internal to the team in terms of how they are with each other, or more importantly, how they are with their stakeholders. So how they're operating outside of the team.
mm,
That teams kind of need to put the pause on and really reflect on, is this the optimal way in terms of how we're working with each other, with our stakeholders, and undoing some of those behaviors. And what I really found was that at the start of team coaching engagements, teams talk a lot about what it is that they want to learn, and they don't talk about what it is really that they want to unlearn. And that kind of starts emerging in the team coaching process itself. And it's the things that the team end up identifying that they want to unlearn is those issues that are much more thorny, generate a much deeper level of learning, and have a bit more of a stickiness factor. But there's definitely an emotional dimension and shift for teams from some of these things that they discover that the team actually needs to unlearn. Just very, very quickly, by way of example, what do I mean? Well, it's quite difficult for teams when they, start generating awareness around, well, we don't really listen to each other. And I thought we were really good at doing that. And I've actually been disrespecting some of my colleagues in ways that I didn't even realize I was doing. And that starts bringing emotions such as shame, guilt, and sometimes defensiveness. No, that's not actually what's happening. And it's those moments that I started to notice that go to a deeper level of learning in team coaching. So hopefully that gives you some insights, some flavor of what I've been looking at. And
well, look forward to the published work, and for you to kind of give us the bottom line of what your thesis really revealed. My dissertation was on the culture of organizational conflict and conflict resolution. And so I was really looking at the climate, prior to getting into team coaching, I'd spent a decade doing a lot of work in the conflict resolution space in mostly international organizations, UN and the like. And so after training like hundreds and hundreds of workshops and that, like tens of thousands of people, I just kind of came to the conclusion that the organizations really didn't have the culture and climate to really enable conflict resolution to really work. Because even though you could train people in skills and try to change the behaviors of conflict, really what was driving that in the first place was an underlying organizational structure problems of bad, technical leaders who were promoted into positions of leadership, or technical experts promoted into positions of leadership and didn't really know how to lead teams. Teams weren't really formed well. There's still an over-reliance on command and control authority structures. And so even if people had the skills to do the work, they didn't feel safe enough to actually do the skills. And then again, a lot of the problems that were manifesting interpersonally were really not interpersonal personality issues, but were really a function of working in an ambiguous, unclear, unsafe environment, which then manifests in interpersonal problems. So that's really what led me to team coaching and to starting the Team Coaching Zone podcast in 2015. And I think I've only become more reinforced to that. I kind of swung the pendulum away from conflict resolution. I didn't want to do any more reactive interventions. I wanted to get more on the front end and do proactive work. I think the reality is somewhere still in the middle where we do get a lot of teams. We still get we do get a lot of teams.
Reactive?
Yeah, only because I think a lot of requests for team coaching tend to come still when teams get in trouble. And the conflict resolution stuff really helps. But a lot of times there's just too much water under the bridge in some cases. And you can help maybe get the team back on track, but sometimes the team leader may transition out or some restructuring can happen. But I'm most optimistic when we can get with a team early, when a leader, for example, is transitioning in to take over a role or take over or start a new team, because then you can put in place a lot of good, ecosystem to really try to avoid getting into the pickles that, teams oftentimes get into. So anyways, where I've come to, I think it's helpful to have reactive methods to deal with problems once they already get bad.
Absolutely.
But I think investments, of course, are better off on the front end being proactive. But I mean, it's just like our health. We tend not to focus on our health until we get into trouble. And then, we get sick and, goes back to what you were saying about just the condition in organizations. We're so focused on the tasks and results that we kind of just burn a lot of the human capital in the process. So yes, I think there's an interesting nexus around performance, learning, health, or you could even say sustainability, and how do we really balance that in the work we're doing. But yeah, good stuff. So Melissa, thanks for that intro, and I know people will get to know you more as these learning sessions unfold. But let's talk a little bit for the listeners today. Actually, what's new in season 3 is we are live streaming these on YouTube and LinkedIn. So we hope we will, get more attendees as we move along. In the past, they were always pre-recorded interviews, and we would release them on all the podcast channels, which we will do as well. So, for the asynchronous learners or the folks in parts of the world where it's just too late at night or too early in the morning, we will have it on all major platforms.
You may not know this, Krister, but the impact of the Team Coaching Zone has been that it's recommended materials on team coaching programs around the globe.
And some companies too. Yeah, I've been contacted with some corporations that have asked if they could put it in their internal learning systems. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No, and I still get emails. I haven't been podcasting really for a couple of years now. I needed a break after my 5-year run, and but I still get emails from people around the world, still, appreciating the show. But to be honest with you, when I launched the Team Coaching Zone podcast, it wasn't really for like money making or anything. I was just genuinely interested in learning, and it led to wonderful business opportunities for me. But that's kind of why I'm back now in season 3, is I'm yearning a bit more to get back in the learning spaces and just hear what people are doing and seeing. And, the field has evolved. So for this season, what we've decided to do is have these Friday huddles. So every Friday we'll be here having these huddles, but we are going to be bringing on guests from the field, including clients, other team coaches, wide open to all the different team coaching schools and methodologies. I know you're trained in a number of team coaching schools, as am I. I don't know if you want to say anything about which of the programs you have been trained in, Melissa, or anything about the team coaching philosophy that you hold or the influences you have, because I think we are both eclectic in the sense that we are using stuff from different schools and some of things that are not in any specific team coaching school, right, or methodology.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the principal training that I undertook was a 16-month diploma with Peter Hawkins, which I know is a program that you've co-facilitated with Peter and Catherine Carr.
And David
Pryor, Catherine?
Yeah. And we were assistant faculty, Catherine and David and I, on the North American Diploma program. Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually took that program in London. And I think it was only in its 3rd ever iteration. And a strong Gestalt influence, obviously through John Leary-Joyce, who was one of the principal faculty, along with Peter Hawkins, Hilary Lyons, and a few others. And it was a very unique experience insofar as, because it was in its 3rd iteration, the faculty were still feeling out how to best present the program and put it together. And we had some very interesting discussions then as participants, which people flew in from all around the world for it, to our experience of the faculty feeling that out, and some really interesting group dynamic and Gestalt discussions. So that was probably the most substantial team coaching journey that I went on in terms of formal qualification. As you know yourself, from the work that we're on the leadership team at 6 Team Conditions, a strong influence of both of ours would be the work of Richard Hackman, Ruth Wagaman, and others. So I think bringing and having a recognition of the need to be fluid between when we are wearing an expertise hat with team around team
Mm,
effectiveness, and grounding our work in team effectiveness is definitely a strong influence.
mm,
But I think both you and I share a real, I'm going to use an Irish word, which is a real gra, which means a real love
okay.
for the emergent practice of
Right.
team coaching
Emergent learning.
and
Yeah.
and emergent learning, and noticing what's going on, not just in the present, but what might have brought the team to the present
Mm,
circumstances that they find themselves in, and what might a future version of that team be.
okay.
Um, and
Yeah.
I think that's kind of where my heart lies, being able
Yeah.
to fluidly move along that continuum.
Nice. Yeah, so I think we're going to welcome all these diverse perspectives on the podcast. I alongside the programs you've mentioned or those influences, I've been delved a lot into the agile
That's right.
stuff, mainly
Yeah,
Kanban and visual management, which is just a staple
yeah,
part of my practice. I think that's been a huge game changer for a lot of the work. Embodiment are some of the things, and
yeah.
yeah, more to, and other influences. So I think like any craft and profession, it's great to, develop your own signature approach and draw on the influences that work for you. I think at the end of the day, the teams don't really care what methodology or school you're coming from. What they care about is it working and effective? And so I think in the spirit of this podcast and the history of this podcast, it's really about creating a space where these diverse perspectives can be shared, and we can kind of get into it and just see what actually works in service of a dynamic, changing context.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And, team coaching, I just had a quick look, because it's often something that gets cited, that it's the kind of fastest growing area
Mm,
of coaching, just to
mm,
see, is that still holding true in terms
yeah.
of, the latest ICF surveys and
Yeah.
studies. And absolutely it is. There,
Mm,
organizations, 70% of organizations are saying that they will invest in team
right.
coaching over the
Right.
coming years, despite the fact of economic uncertainty. That
Mm,
there almost is a feeling that there needs to be a doubling down on that. But interestingly, what organizations are recognizing is, as well, is that they need to develop the leaders and managers and have
yeah.
coaching as a competency. And there's going to be a big investment there as well.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what you were saying about this whole idea of, do we get invited in when it's reactive? Like there's
Yeah.
something to solve or respond to. And my senses are, and this is just a sense as opposed to anything that's grounded in evidence, that organizations are going to be playing a little bit of catch up around developing internal leaders to have coaching conversations. And it's still going to very much have a focus at that individual leader development, one-on-one paradigm that happens a lot in
Mm,
organizations. And the reason that they're going to keep bringing in more and more external team coaching is because that competency is so far away from a lot of organizations in
yeah.
terms of what they're going to be able to provide. I don't know what your thoughts are to that. Do you sense that there's going to be a big demand for team coaching over the next
I do.
24, 36 months?
And I think we will in this season have some internal team coaching, either practitioners or whole teams come on, because we've been involved in actually training inside of organizations, cadres of team coaches. I think the challenge is, you know, you can bend the learning curve on team coaching only so much. So if you have a background in executive coaching or a background in organization and development learning, depending on your background, I think to pull it all together, because I do think doing team coaching well requires multiple competencies and sets of capabilities. What I have found with the training of internal coaches, it takes really 6 months to really even a year to get up to speed where they're really adding
That's right.
value
Yeah,
given the large investment to stand up an internal team coaching group. I do think there's a lot of advantages, but organizations are changing so often and it's so dynamic. I think we've been trying to learn how to bend the curve as much as we can so that they can get value out of it. And I think they
that's right.
do. I mean, they can oftentimes reach a larger number of teams, but to your point, I do think external team coaches are still going to be needed.
Yep.
We'll talk a little bit here, maybe shortly, about some of the trends, which for me, a lot of it revolves around really equipping team leaders better, because there are
Yep.
just not enough team coaches or budgets for all teams to have a coach. So I think we really need to kind of address the gap in leadership development around team leadership, which is something we could actually talk about a bit today. But just before we go down some of those rabbit holes, Melissa, I think just to kind of set some more expectations for this season. So every Friday we'll be having these team coaching learning conversations. We will be inviting, again, folks from the field on, clients, interesting
Internal
thought
coach
leaders,
practitioners. Yep.
external, all that. Carissa, who's not able to join today, she's going back and forth between South Africa and London these days. So
London.
when she
Yep.
joins again, she is actually leading up a thing around supervision. So I think she wants to have some conversations around what is coming up in supervision for team coaches, and talking a little bit about the role of supervision, because I know, you and I believe that, especially when you're on some of these complex cases, and the higher up you go, the psychological pressures in a lot of teams, not just always up vertically, but if you have teams of folks doing change management, the pressures can get pretty intense, and having supervision can really make all the difference between staying in the game and doing really good work or not. So I think we'll have a little bit of focus there, and and really hear from the participants and the listeners. What are you guys wanting to hear in conversations around? We would love to get your recommendations. You can be dropping them in the chat here if you're on YouTube or LinkedIn. You can also go to the Team Coaching Learning Community group on LinkedIn. I popped this in the up on the screen here, so you can check that out. And we'll be re-engaging more there. So that's a great place also to suggest topics or guests that you think we should have on the show. So feel free to check that out. But Melissa, while we still have some time today, these sessions will run 45 minutes, an hour. I guess it'll really depend, maybe even longer, depending on the kind of energy we get flowing.
Yep.
Today is more of a kickoff episode, but why don't we already just dive in? You and I are in the field doing work. I was just commenting to Catherine Carr this morning, actually, who I was emailing with, that it felt good to be back in the room again after years of Zoom. Although that kind of, just learning to coach a team from start to finish, just 100% through Zoom, led to, I think, some interesting innovation and evolution as well. But I'm kind of happy to be a little bit more, I think, the hybrid working, which I'm seeing a lot of my clients, right, are doing, working from home, but also going into the office a couple of days a week and trying to figure that out. But I was just with a team earlier this week in person, and it felt good to be back in the in-person setting. But when you think about like just one or two themes that are really popping up for you right now, 2023 February, that's got you intrigued and challenged and want to do learning around, what are some of the headlines for you, Melissa?
Well, the framing of learning conversations come back for me, because I feel we're kind of probably at a tipping point in organizational life where there's going to be a real return to real dialogue about real problems. And one that's really top of mind for me, and this probably relates to my experiences of working with various different teams in 2022, is around diversity and inclusion. And I think I spoke to you about this at the start of the year in our 16 Conditions Community of Practice call. And with diversity and inclusion, I guess, they call it diversity washing. But I've worked with a number of top teams last year, and there still seems to be a little bit of a lip service going on when it comes to diversity and inclusion, insofar as it's diversity and inclusion either in name only, or the barriers are not being overcome to get more diversity and inclusion at the top of organizations. Yet it's completely at odds or incongruent with the values that a lot of organizations are espousing, And I realize it's complex, and I realize it's not
Mm,
a straightforward issue, and I realize it's going to take a number of years for us to see more balance at the top of the organization. However, I really feel that team coaching has a valuable role to play insofar as one of the things that I saw across the teams that I was working with last year is that we're able to bring the conversation into the room in a much more real way.
mm,
And I noticed some real conversations starting to open up around this as a
mm.
consequence of the
And what
skill.
the diversity you're speaking about, is it more like demographic diversity around race, gender, region? I know you've been working with some global leadership teams, so there's like regional disparities
Mhm,
around which regions of the world
mhm.
have more voice. But I'm curious, when you think about diversity, and I think this will probably be great to have a learning conversation on it, because I
I
think it
do.
goes
I
beyond
do.
just demography or demographic diversity, but
Yeah,
gets in more. I think the literature on team effectiveness talks a lot about skill diversity,
that's right.
versus demographic variables. But I think that could be a rich learning conversation to have. Yeah, but what do you, when you think about the DEI? What is that looking like
So,
in terms of the teams
what
you're
it's
leading?
looking like for me, certainly, if I just kind of cap off 2022 and reflect on
Mm,
2022, um, gender issue is
mm,
still very strong and very, very important. Now, is it a lot different to when I first start doing this work and walked into boardrooms
mm,
and found myself as an external person being the only woman in the room?
yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm,
It's different, but it's still there. I'm also talking about ethnic diversity.
mm,
That's still not where it should be. Now, it is better on global teams for sure. Um, but again, what you often see on some of these bigger, larger leadership teams is that, in essence, they are a team of teams. Um,
mm,
with that by its very nature creating exclusion and inclusion
mm,
dynamics. So
yeah.
I don't think it's as simple as gender and race. I think it goes beyond that in terms of inclusion as a member of a team, and
Mm,
outside of my gender, my race, what voices get heard, what voices don't get heard. And that's where I see team coaches as powerful instruments of being
mm,
able to
yeah.
bring that very difficult conversation to the table,
Yeah.
rather than leave it as, an unspoken dynamic that is driving
Yeah.
behaviors in the team.
It's interesting, just
So,
to bring this into a
yeah,
case, Melissa. I was just working with, I
yeah.
did a senior leadership team offsite on one day this week, Tuesday actually this week, and there's 7 members of this team, and a lot of great things in that session. But in the interviews leading up to this offsite kickoff relaunch of this team,
Mm,
what I contracted them with around was doing a 1 day in person and then 2 half-day follow-ups at 1 month intervals, which is kind of a nice kind of boxed, relationship, at least for a piece of work. That
mm,
so I could have just stacked the 2 days back to back, but we decided to kind of break it up a little bit to give them some chance to kind of integrate some of the learnings. But anyways, in the interviews leading up to it, one of the things I, learned was in the group, some people were a lot more bottom line, task oriented, and felt like the leadership team discussions could just go on ad nauseum. And there was a little bit
mm,
of criticism that some of the members of the team were just very conceptual and would just go off on tangents and the whole meeting would be done,
yeah.
and then some of those on the other side in the interviews were saying that they felt like they didn't want to have too much micromanagement on the team and overly focused on operational fires and tasks, and that they needed some space for learning and reflection. So it was really interesting just talking about diversity there. That was coming up in the interview. So I did a team assessment with them as part of the day. And, when I was thinking about the different methods I could use to debrief the results, in the past, my typical go-to is an embodiment approach where I have people kind of
Mm,
review the report, cherry pick a couple things that stand out. And then I actually have them stand up and we embody on the floor the model and talk about the data on the model. But for
Yeah.
this team, given that, I think they already surfaced some issues around communication, which you referred to earlier, I decided to use this simple technique, which I call the campfire, which is I just said what I want to do is just first go around twice. And for each of you, just to react to one thing in the data that resonated with you, you liked or didn't like, or you have questions around. And the others, your job is just to listen to your colleagues and not make any comments, but you will get a chance to have a free flow after a bit. So we did 2 rounds of this. It only took like maybe 10, 12 minutes to do 2 rounds. And what was just really striking, Melissa, when I got to the 3rd round, which is like opening it up without any controls or anything, free flow, already a consensus had emerged just by listening to every colleague being listened to genuinely and deeply by their teammates 2 for 2 rounds in 12 minutes. I mean, there was enough data in that report to go on for hours, right? There's juicy stuff in there. And that was one of the comments people made is, oh, there's a lot of juicy stuff in here. But, and so in 25 minutes, we kind of got to the heart of where the team was in this baseline. And a consensus and an appreciation of really what were the couple of things that really needed shifting. And then, we were on our way getting into some purpose work and visualizing their work and stuff. So anyways, I just throw that out there as an example because
well, that's a great example, Krister, because like essentially what you created for the team was you allowed the brain to go into rest mode.
Yeah.
Because everybody knew that they were going to get the opportunity to speak by the dynamic that you had set up, rather than I need to see where I'm going to get my point in. I absolutely love Nancy Klein's work on setting up and creating the thinking environment for teams. I don't know if you've come across that, but it sounds to me,
I'm not familiar in depth with it.
It sounded to me like you had set it up that dynamic where you allowed people's brains to go into rest mode. And by the very nature of work and action and all of the things that we socially create in organizations and within teams, we often don't even create and it's a simple thing, right?
25 what I was struck by
25 powerful minutes.
Yeah. And so the last round was a go around what are you hearing emerging in the voice of the collective or in the voice of the team voice idea. And that's also very powerful. But what I was struck by is in 25 minutes, we reached a consensus. Everybody felt heard. It's kind of like regulating the tempo. Sometimes the things we're coaching, like the team ramps up, and I think it's important to slow them down and even get them into silence at times. But so anyways, so it sounds like one of the themes we need to really dig into is diversity, equity, and inclusion in all its aspects, and get some folks on here that we can get into that topic.
Absolutely. So what's top of mind for what's there's other things that are top of mind, but I'm curious to know what's kind of noodling for you.
Going back to my early team coaching cases, and if you go back to season 1, I think in my 2nd episode, I gave like a long introduction to some of my own early cases. And, I have to say, team leader issues still dominate most team coaching engagements for me, just around why we're being brought in. Usually if they're, a lot of times we get pulled in because the team leader has been brought in, takes over a team, they get into action really quickly. And then 6 to 9 months later, the team's just not in a good shape. And there's just a lot of authority struggle and issues going on. So, I have this, kind of anti-authority problems, going back to my early career.
I never knew this about you, Krister. This is new information.
So I always had issues with authority, but, I just have learned like really the partnership with the team leader is essential. And more, I feel like, because I've gotten a chance to work with a lot of teams over my career, I don't feel like, I think the more I can help the leader and the teams to build some capabilities so they're not so dependent on the coach, I'm more and more for that. And, the team I was working with earlier this week, as I spoke about, I've actually been coaching the leader one-on-one for the last 2 months leading up to this session. And she had already implemented a lot of the things in the coaching before I got in the room. For
Mhm.
example, a lot of teams and individuals for that matter really struggle with prioritization. Most
Mhm.
of us have so many different tasks and projects we're working on. We're actually not thinking about balancing our capacity with the demands we're accepting, right? And
Mhm.
so one of the things I found was really helping her start the process before we actually get in a leadership team to collaborative work as a leadership team. It can be really helpful to help the individuals who are each running their own teams and their own silos to get really clear about what it is that they're working on in their areas, and helping their colleagues first start by understanding what their peers are actually
Mhm.
working on. You'd be surprised in most leadership teams that leaders have no really kind of clue really what their colleagues are working on, nor, like in many cases, where actually there are interdependencies that exist between the leaders.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyways, so I was coaching her on was she actually started an exercise of asking each of her leaders to come to a team leader session meeting. They have 90-minute meetings every 2 weeks, and bring their top 3 priorities that their silo or that leader was working on in their own teams. And what she reported back on is that some of them, the task oriented ones, came with their 3, but some leaders showed up with like 20 in the list. And so then she had to work, and she accepted that and just started working with that, but then got them down to 3, and then started to help them visualize their individual priorities on a visual management board, a Kanban board,
Mhm.
and just started to build a muscle even amongst the individual members around prioritization, and starting to visualize work, starting to look at interdependencies. And then in my session with them, that laid the groundwork then to really move up to the team level around what are the collaborative pieces of work that this leadership team needs to be doing in service of its stakeholders. And we did that work following a purpose activity, and we got really clear about the really the key stakeholders that they need to be engaging with. And so, anyways, the point I'm kind of getting at is, I think compared to some of my other team coaching engagements where I've kind of downplayed the one-on-one coaching with the leader,
Mhm.
equipping the team leader more with some skills, even some training in how to lead a team. I found this engagement really working so much more smoothly, because I think we've slowed down enough to get some basics in place, and for the team leader to really be coaching the team with me, but doing a lot of great team leadership practice in prior to and now, hopefully after the session we had earlier this week. So I don't know, that's a long-winded way of saying, Melissa, I think equipping team leaders in addition to training team
Mhm.
coaches, I think, is essential. And I've said many times the leadership development industry is the largest dollar for dollar part of the learning and development field. And yet,
Mhm.
despite it's the most studied social science topic, more studies,
Yep.
articles, books have been written on leadership. And yet, I mean, just look at the condition of our world, let alone in organizations. I mean, look at the international geopolitical situation we have around a lack of good leadership. But strikingly, when you look in the literature, and you may be more up to speed on the latest literature, there's just a massive gap around team leadership. It's
Mhm.
almost like totally missing in leadership development, at least from my what I've been seeing in organizations around the high potential leadership programs and institutes that they run.
There's definitely
Yeah.
still an overfocus on, you know, the individual and, developing their
Yeah.
self-awareness and their kind of
EQ
leader
and mhm.
competencies, but not leadership development. It's still
Yeah.
a huge gap. And I would say it's a huge gap across business schools as well, but that's probably a
Mm.
story for another day. But what you were saying there, Krista, about working with the leader more and creating the space for leaders to work with their teams, I think also it signals to me if the team leader is making the time for that, is up for that, is seeing the benefit for that, that kind of parallels to what goes on in the team coaching sessions itself.
Mm.
So if the team leader is, too busy or I don't have time for that,
Right.
is there outsourcing of leadership going on in that
Yeah.
team? on a day-to-day basis? And my answer is most definitely yes.
Yeah.
So I think there is something to that. I also think that there's
I'm chuckling about that just quickly, Melissa. A couple of years ago, I actually had a team I was coaching, and the leader asked me to like mediate an interpersonal conflict between two of her direct reports. And it was offloading her leadership responsibility to an external coach, kind of do the dirty work,
or offloading it to other team members that
Right.
have various different positions on the team. So there's that aspect of it. But I also think as well that there's an awful lot of noise for leaders at the moment. And I think that's a reflection of some of the things that, are real challenges in organizations at the moment,
Yeah.
whether it be,
Not easy to be a leader now.
heading into economic downturns, geopolitical tensions, just coming through a pandemic and everything that went with that,
Right.
new expectations around work practices. So there's an awful lot of noise, and there's an awful lot of expectation of leaders. So what I liked about what you were saying is the importance of just creating the space for the team leader to step out of the noise,
Yeah.
to
Take the
clarify their
armor off.
thinking. Absolutely. Where, you're going to have expectations of them in terms of how they show up in the coaching, for sure. And, your expectations are going to be different to my expectations if I was coaching a leader. But they're not driven from a place of internal agenda, if that makes sense. We don't have that same skin in the game in terms of, if you're part of the organization. And one of the things that I reflected on when I was looking back over my 2022 cases really resonates with what you're saying. And we really need to create more space for leaders to have the time to discern between, what's just actual noise, and I should learn skills and strategies to curb, just see it as that. And what are the real things that I need to be paying attention to here?
I think adding to that, just another theme is, I think, early on, because I didn't really know how to do much more than a team building retreat when I first started team coaching, so a lot of my team coaching was very, what I would say, front heavy. It was interviews, diagnostic instruments, doing some kind of razzle dazzle, half day, 1 day, 2 day, or even extreme cases like a 3-day team retreat. And we gin up the teams and get them, going. I think that's in some ways, the easy and fun part of the work. But the real change work happens in the day-to-day practices. And I think more and more, as I've done more team coaching over the years, I just come to appreciate that just like the team leaders need some space to reflect and integrate. And, change is hard. A lot of times we think we can change lots of things very quickly. And I think there is something about just incrementally helping teams shift 1 or 2 behaviors every few weeks or month, whatever the cadence of the team is, and start to put in, even in our own team that we're a part of, Melissa, you and I are on a team together, even reflecting as team coaches on our own disciplines of being able to put in place good team practices, I think is something we need to kind of go into more around really I go back to intentional change theory by Boyatzis, that change is hard. I remember when I was in graduate school, the stats were throwing around that like 70% of change efforts, typically would fail. So I think we're a little bit over optimistic a lot of times that we actually can unlearn behaviors and habits that you were alluding to earlier and put in place practices. I think we definitely can do it, but I think it's maybe a bit harder than we think. Right. Even personal change is very difficult. We have deeply ingrained practices, and you see this in the teams as well.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure McKinsey released a big report in 2022 saying that number hasn't changed in terms of change. Yeah. So I guess one thing that bubbled when we were talking as well, and you mentioned you were speaking with Catherine Carr earlier this morning over email, is, what's changed for us as team coaches because of this new digitized world, this new hybrid world. totally agree with you. It's great to be
Mm,
back in the room,
yeah.
but it's also great to be able to convene teams for shorter bursts
Yeah.
that are dispersed and globalized for 45 minutes, 60 minutes, as the power of what you were able to help that
Right.
team within 25 minutes. I know that was an
Yeah.
in-person
Yeah.
one.
Exactly.
But you and I have been doing a bit of experimenting, and maybe we could do an episode on some of our experimentations, such
Yeah.
as you and I coached 3 co-leaders together in between coaching sessions.
Mm,
Some of the accelerated programs that we looked at
yeah.
developing. But you hit on something that I think is fundamental, and you hit on this whole idea of it's not just what happens in the coaching session itself, which needs to be impactful. And the expectation for coaches to do razzle dazzle is still there, unfortunately. But it's what actually happens in the in between.
Mm,
What discipline and muscle is being developed? What becomes a stickiness factor for these teams? What becomes a stickiness factor for these leaders? I think is an important uh, thing for us to really, really look at. Um, and when there isn't that discipline, where do we go as team coaches? Like, does it bring us back to going to a place of high authority and, well, you haven't done what you said you were going to do?
mm,
Us as instruments of holding others accountable and how we might go about that. So I think that would be really interesting to invite some other team coaching practitioners on
for
to have
sure.
discussions about, you know,
Yeah.
where do we go and where do we need to go as team coaches in this other element of our job, which
Yeah.
is uh, holding the team to some type of accountability.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
is
I
that
think that,
even our role?
right. That's an interesting question. I think that does, show up also just around metrics and measurement. And,
Mm.
I think a lot of I was just actually on a call yesterday with a VC firm that was really interested in around, just do you have data that shows that team coaching or like these team interventions actually impacts, the bottom line of companies? They
Yep.
actually want to see
Yep.
results. So I had to speak to that a little bit. But yeah, I do think that we have a lot of case studies and qualitative data. I think in the field in general, there's kind of a real lack of really good, rigorous research around organization, the impact of on organizational outcomes, including what you've been studying, organizational learning.
Mm.
We
Mm.
have a little bit of that from some of the work we've done, but I think we need to have a lot
Mm.
more of that. It's not easy to measure those things, but I think just because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't be making some efforts around that.
Well, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you and Carissa, and maybe some of our other colleagues might want to join us around what I have found in terms of what's being measured in team coaching, what
Mm,
isn't being measured in
okay,
team coaching,
that'd be interesting.
and
Yeah.
it is quite revealing. So
Wow.
maybe that's a full episode in itself. And interestingly, some new research papers over the last, say, 2 or 3 years have emerged with some
Mm.
new team coaching frameworks and
Huh,
models and conceptual
that'd be
thinking.
interesting to check
So
it out.
maybe we could have some of those authors on to share with us,
Yeah.
the insights from their
Yeah.
papers. Yeah, yeah.
Sounds good. So
Sebastian
again,
Fox, if you are listening to us, we're
yeah.
coming for you.
Yeah, so to kind of summarize a bit, these Friday sessions will be these learning conversations exploring all kinds of topics. We will be bringing on groups of people, guests from the field, practitioners, internal
Mhm,
clients and coaches and internal folks.
mhm.
And I think we've touched on some of the themes around diversity in teams, around team
Yep.
leader issues and dynamics, around really discipline in teams and really behavior change and really the ability to actually facilitate real behavior change in teams, moving from the individual to the team more, latest research, research topics and the like. So lots
I think
of things to be exploring around. Yeah.
the importance of helping teams visualize their work. I think that
Yeah.
would be, I know
Yeah.
that's an area that you're really interested in and doing a lot of work in. And I think that's another
Yeah.
important addition. One final thing, Krister, I invited a group of team coaches that are going through a facilitated community of practice stroke peer learning to develop and enhance their own coaching skills. They had invited me in maybe about a month ago to come and be part of the set as an external guest, just to be part of the conversation. We had a very interesting conversation on power and dynamics in teams. So as I was there with them, I thought, wouldn't it be a very interesting idea to invite that intact group
Absolutely.
of team coaches onto our podcast to share that whole learning and development that coaches tend to go through with each other and how it enhanced their practice and what they learned about group dynamics from being part of that set and lots of other interesting, the topics that they covered and lots of other interesting things. So that's another episode we have in the making.
Yeah. So folks, we've been burning daylight here for about an hour. So I think maybe this is a good time to start to bring today's conversation to a close. But again, we'll be here every Friday. Would love to hear from you guys. If you go over to the Team Coaching Learning Community group in LinkedIn, if you're not in there, jump in there. We've got 1,700 members in the group. We're going to be kind of firing that group up a bit, so you can check that out. Feel free to interact with us there. Drop some comments, suggestions of topics or people you'd love to for us to have on, and we'll make some invitations. In addition to these weekly streams, we will continue to have some pre-recorded one-on-one interviews with various people. So stay on the lookout for that. And thank you so much for coming today, Melissa. Great to be in conversation with you. And I'm really excited to see how we can collectively take it to the next level with learning and, continuing doing this important work. And I think you hit the nail on the head at the top that, we have 8 billion people on the planet. We have serious geopolitical issues going on, health issues in organizations and globally, issues with the economy and just governance in general. And so, I think as a species, stepping up our ability to collaborate, couldn't be more urgent. So I do think, those of us in this field have some special skills that are kind of generally lacking in a lot of parts of society. So it'd be great to see us getting in with the teams that are really making the decisions and having impacts on broader society. So yeah.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Okay.
See you next week.
Okay, everybody. Thanks for coming today. Have a great day. And we'll see you.
Bye-bye.
See you back soon. Take care now. Bye.